Jerome Watts was 38 years old when his wife's boyfriend looked him dead in the eye and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh. The laugh of a man who had never once been made to feel small in his life, and saw no reason to start now. Jerome had built his construction company from a single truck and a tool belt. He had bought his mother a house. He had been faithful, present, and loyal for 10 years of marriage to a woman who had quietly decided he was no longer enough. But none of that was on Brendan Price's mind when he straightened his jacket, looked Jerome over like he was reading a receipt, and said it. Flat, casual, almost bored. "I got her pregnant." One sentence. Then the laugh. Brendan Price had money, status, and 9 years of never being held accountable for anything. He had absolutely no idea what kind of man was standing in front of him. What happened in the next 10 seconds put Brendan on the floor. What happened in the 10 weeks after that took everything else. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The Victorian sat on Edgewood Avenue like a skeleton waiting for skin. 3 stories of exposed bone, stripped lath, gutted plaster, joists dark with a century of settling. The porch sagged where water had crept through a failed roof decades ago. Every window was open to the morning air, and through them came the sound of saws and the low pulse of a radio someone had tuned to V103. Jerome Watts stood on the second floor with a pry bar in his hand, working a section of rotted subfloor away from the joists beneath. He didn't need to be here doing this. He owned the company. He had crews for this. 12 men across 3 active sites in Atlanta alone. But his hands knew the work before his name was on a truck door. And some mornings the only thing that made sense to him was the weight of a tool and the honesty of a board that was either sound or it wasn't. He was 38. 6'2", built like a man who had carried things his whole life and never put them down just because someone offered to help. His boots were broken in, but clean. His Carhartt jacket had the logo stitched on the chest, Watts and Okafor Construction, the letters small, the stitching tight. He didn't need the jacket to advertise. People in Atlanta's construction community knew the name. They knew what it meant. The work would be done right, on time, and exactly as promised. He had built the company from a single truck, a used F-250 with a dented tailgate and a toolbox bolted to the bed. He was 24 then, fresh off a 5-year apprenticeship with a man named Earl Clemens, who taught him 2 things: measure everything twice, and never promise what you haven't already figured out how to deliver. Jerome took those 2 rules and a $12,000 loan from his mother's retirement account, paid back in 18 months, and turned them into something real. Now, Watts and Okafor ran 3 crews: residential renovations, small commercial builds, and the occasional municipal subcontract that Victor found through his old legal connections. Victor Okafor, his partner for 10 years, his closest friend for 15. A man who went to law school and then picked up a hammer because he said buildings didn't lie to you the way briefs did. Jerome pulled another strip of rotted pine free and tossed it toward the pile by the stairwell. The wood was soft as bread where the moisture had worked through it. Beneath, the joists were still solid, heart pine, old growth, the kind of lumber they didn't make anymore. He ran his thumb along the grain and felt the density of it. 130 years of holding weight without complaint. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. He pulled it out. A text from Marcus, his crew lead on the Cascade Road site. Compressor blew. Sending guys home. Parts won't be in till Thursday. Jerome typed back, "Call Victor. See if Decatur crew can absorb anyone tomorrow. I'll handle the order." He looked at the time. 2:47. Early enough. He'd head home, make calls from there, Get ahead of the schedule gap before it costs them a day. The drive home took 20 minutes. He took Boulevard to Ponce, then east toward the neighborhood where the house sat. A 4-bedroom craftsman in Kirkwood he and Adrian had bought 7 years ago, back when the street still had more potential than proof. Now the block had new fences and edged lawns and cars that cost more than his first 3 trucks combined. Adrian's silver Lexus sat in the driveway. That was unusual for a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon. She worked until 6 most days, sometimes later. She was the administrative director for the surgical wing at Grady, a job she had earned, a title she carried with visible pride. She was rarely home before Jerome. He pulled in beside her car and cut the engine. Sat for a moment with his hands still on the wheel, feeling the quiet tick of the cooling motor. Inside, the house was still. He set his keys on the table by the door. Adrienne? Nothing. He walked through the living room. The kitchen was clean, untouched. No bag on the counter. No shoes by the back door. Babe? You home? Then he heard it. From upstairs, behind the closed bedroom door. Her voice. Low. Warm. A small laugh. The kind that lived in the throat. Private and pleased. The sound of a woman talking to someone who made her feel light. Easy. Amused. She hadn't sounded like that with him in a long time. Jerome stood in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs. His hand rested on the banister. He counted the seconds without meaning to. 1, 5, 15, 23, 31, 40. Then he let go of the banister, walked back to the kitchen, filled a glass of water from the tap, and sat down at the table. The house was quiet around him. The glass sweated against his palm. He already knew. He just didn't have the shape of it yet. Jerome woke at 5:14. The room was still dark. Beside him, Adrian's side of the bed was already empty. The sheets were pulled back neatly, her pillow arranged the way she always left it, centered, smoothed, as if she had never been there at all. He lay still for a moment, listened. The shower wasn't running. She was already past that stage. He could hear her downstairs, the soft click of a cabinet, the pour of coffee, the particular rhythm of a woman who had been awake long enough to assemble herself completely before anyone else opened their eyes. He got up, dressed slowly. Jeans, a clean thermal, boots. He didn't rush. When he came down the stairs, she was standing at the island with a travel mug in one hand and her phone in the other. She wore a charcoal blazer and gold earrings he didn't remember buying. Her hair was pressed straight, edges sharp. She looked polished, composed, ready for someone. "Morning," she said, without looking up. "Morning." She set the phone face down on the counter, picked up her keys, glanced at him once with a smile that touched nothing behind her eyes. "Long day today. Might be late." "All right." She kissed the air near his cheek. Then she was gone. The garage door hummed open, hummed closed, and the house settled back into silence. Jerome poured himself coffee, sat at the table, drank it black and slow. He did not feel rage, not yet. What he felt was something colder, quieter. The particular stillness of a man whose suspicions had moved past theory and into territory that required information, not reaction. He watched for 2 days. He did not search. He did not accuse. He simply paid attention with the same precision he brought to reading a blueprint, noting what was there, what was missing, and what the gaps between them meant. The phone. Always face down now. Always within reach. She carried it to the bathroom when she showered. She carried it to the car when she walked to the driveway to check something. The texts. He caught a glimpse once, standing behind her in the kitchen while she thought he was still outside. A thread she closed the moment his reflection appeared in the screen. The deletion was fast, practiced, muscle memory, but she wasn't perfect. Nobody running a double life was perfect forever. The contact was still there, saved clean and professional in her phone under a name designed to look like nothing. Dr. Price. Work. Calls after 9 at night. 3 in 2 days. Each one lasting between 7 and 22 minutes. Jerome sat with the name. Turned it over. Let it settle. Then the memory surfaced, clear as a photograph. 2 years ago. The Grady Foundation Gala. A ballroom full of administrators and donors in dark suits. Adrienne had introduced him to a man near the bar. Tall, light-skinned, jaw like it had been planned by an architect. A watch on his wrist that cost more than Jerome's first truck. This is Brendan Price. He runs operations for the entire hospital system. Brendan had shaken Jerome's hand with the kind of grip that measured you while pretending to greet you. His eyes had moved past Jerome almost immediately, back to Adrienne, back to whoever mattered more in the room. Jerome was a contractor, a +1. Background. Now Jerome had the face, the name, the title. VP of Hospital Operations, 41. Wealthy, polished, connected. He did not confront Adrienne. He confirmed. Thursday morning, Jerome drove to Grady Memorial. He had every right to be there. The hospital's new surgical wing expansion had been in planning for 6 months, and Watts and Okafor had been promised a subcontract bid package, concrete and structural framing. He was expected. His meeting was at 10 with the facility's coordinator. He arrived early, parked on the 3rd level of the parking structure, cut the engine. At 9:42, a black Mercedes S-Class pulled into a reserved space 20 yards from Jerome's truck. The door opened. Brendan Price stepped out. Navy suit, no tie, leather bag over one shoulder. He was on the phone, finishing a call, laughing at something. Casual. The easy sound of a man who moved through the world assuming every room had been built to hold him. He ended the call, pocketed the phone, turned toward the elevator. Then he stopped. His eyes found Jerome's truck. Then Jerome, standing beside it now, keys in hand, watching. Recognition moved across Brendan's face. Not fear, not guilt. Something closer to calculation. Brief and quickly resolved. He adjusted the bag on his shoulder, glanced once at his own reflection in the car's window. Then he walked toward Jerome with a stride that didn't hesitate. Jerome. He said the name like he was trying it out. Good. I was going to have Adrienne do this, but you and me, man to man, that's better. Jerome said nothing. His hands were still. His face was still. Brendan rolled his shoulders back, straightened to his full height, an inch shorter than Jerome, though he didn't seem to know it. He looked Jerome over once. The boots, the jacket, the logo on the chest. His mouth twitched at one corner, the way a man's mouth moves when he finds something slightly beneath him. I got her pregnant. The words landed in the concrete silence of the garage. 1 beat, 2. Then Brendan laughed. It was not nervous. It was not uncomfortable. It was the laugh of a man who had looked at Jerome Watts, 10 years of marriage, a business built with his bare hands, a life assembled board by board from nothing, and decided he was not worth a serious tone of voice. A laugh that said, "What are you going to do about it?" Jerome's right hand came up from his side like something mechanical, smooth, fast, weighted with every ounce of the calm he had carried for 3 days. His fist connected with the point of Brendan's jaw in a single, clean, precisely delivered blow. Brendan Price dropped. His bag hit the concrete first, then his shoulder, then the side of his face, bouncing once against the painted floor. His legs folded under him like a man whose strings had been cut. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, bright against the gray surface. Jerome stepped back. 1 step. He straightened his jacket, pulled the cuff of his sleeve back into place. Then he looked down at the man on the floor, the man who was already blinking, already reaching for his jaw with a hand that shook. Jerome's voice was quiet, level, the voice of a man who was not finished. Remember this moment. You'll want to refer back to it. He turned, walked to his truck, started the engine. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and called Victor. It rang twice. "V, we need to meet tonight." Jerome sat in his truck with the engine idling. The parking structure was quiet around him. Just the distant hum of the elevator machinery and the faint echo of someone's heels on concrete 2 levels down. His right hand rested on the steering wheel. The knuckles were tight. Not swollen yet, but they would be by tonight. He flexed his fingers once, twice. The ache was small and specific and satisfying in a way he did not examine too closely. He did not go back inside. The subcontract bid could wait. The facilities coordinator could wait. Everything that was not the next correct step could wait. Victor picked up on the second ring. "V, we need to meet tonight." A pause. 1 beat. Victor heard something in Jerome's voice. Not panic, not heat, but the particular flatness that meant a decision had already been made, and the only remaining question was execution. "Where?" Victor asked. "Mama's house. I'll be there by 7. No questions. No what happened or are you okay." 15 years of friendship had taught Victor the difference between Jerome needing to talk and Jerome needing a plan. This was the second one. Jerome hung up. He sat in the truck for another full minute, watching the space where Brendan Price had fallen. The blood would still be there, a small smear on the painted concrete, already drying in the afternoon heat that crept through the structure's open walls. He put the truck in reverse and drove south toward his mother's house. Doris Watts lived in a brick ranch in College Park. Modest, clean, paid off since Jerome handed her the title 8 years ago. The lawn was trimmed. The azaleas along the front walk were blooming early this year, deep pink against the red brick. Jerome had replaced the porch railing last spring, and the wood still smelled faintly of the sealant he'd used. Victor's truck was already in the driveway when Jerome pulled up at 6:48. A white Ford F-250 with Watts and Okafor Construction on the door in clean navy letters. Victor was inside. Jerome could see him through the front window, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands folded. Jerome let himself in through the side door. The house smelled like coffee and something warm. Cornbread, maybe, or the tail end of whatever Doris had made for her own dinner. Victor looked up when Jerome entered the kitchen. His eyes moved once to Jerome's right hand, then back to his face. He noted the knuckles. He said nothing about them. "Sit down," Victor said. Jerome sat. The kitchen table was small. Oak, scratched from decades of use, covered now with a clean cloth Doris had laid out. 2 mugs were already set. Victor's was half empty. Victor did not offer comfort. He did not say, "I'm sorry," or "How are you holding up," or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to offer. He leaned forward slightly, both forearms on the table, and asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want the outcome to look like?" Jerome had been thinking about this since the parking structure, since before the parking structure, since the hallway outside his own bedroom 3 days ago, listening to his wife laugh for another man. 3 things, Jerome said. His voice was level, measured. "I want a divorce. On my terms, not hers. I want the business protected, fully, completely, no ambiguity. And I want accountability for Brendan Price, the kind he cannot write a check to make disappear." Victor nodded slowly. Not agreement, acknowledgement. He was already thinking. Jerome could see it in the way Victor's jaw tightened slightly, the way his eyes moved to a middle distance, where legal architecture was being assembled in real time. "We'll need Harris," Victor said. "Family law, the forensic side especially. Call him tomorrow." "Tonight," Victor corrected. "I'll call tonight." The side door opened. Doris came in from the hallway carrying a 3rd mug and the coffee pot. She wore house slippers and a cardigan over her dress. Her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She set the mug in front of Jerome, filled it without asking, and then sat down in the 3rd chair. She did not ask what happened. She looked at her son, really looked, the way only a mother can look, reading the geography of damage on a face she had studied for 38 years. And then she folded her hands on the table. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I should have told you 6 months ago." Jerome waited. "Paula came to me at Easter dinner, pulled me aside in the kitchen while everyone was in the yard." Doris's voice was steady, but her hands pressed together more tightly. "She said Adrienne had been talking to a divorce lawyer. Not recently, baby. For over a year." The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. "She said Adrienne had a plan. Moving money, your money, from the joint accounts into something private. Something you wouldn't see on the regular statements. She was timing it, waiting for a promotion to come through at the hospital, so she'd have her own salary locked in before she filed." Doris paused. Her eyes held Jerome's. "Paula begged me not to say anything. Said she was trying to talk Adrienne out of it. I wanted to believe she could." Jerome's hand was wrapped around the coffee mug. The heat pressed into his sore knuckles. He was not about to be left. He was about to be picked clean. The affair was not carelessness. It was cover. Adrienne had been running 2 operations at once, one emotional, one financial, and both of them required Jerome to stay blind, stay passive, stay exactly where she put him until she was ready to walk away with everything she could carry. He set the mug down. The sound was small and final against the oak table. "We have work to do." Doris nodded. Victor pulled a legal pad from the bag at his feet and set it on the table. He uncapped a pen. The 3 of them sat at Doris's kitchen table. Jerome, his mother, and the man who had been building beside him for 15 years. And they began. Jerome pulled into his own driveway at 10:17 that night. The porch light was on. Both cars were there, his truck, her Lexus. The house was a craftsman-style 4-bedroom. He had renovated himself in the first year of their marriage, back when Adrienne would bring him lemonade on the scaffolding and ask questions about load-bearing walls with what he believed was genuine interest. He sat in the truck for 30 seconds, not gathering himself, settling, choosing a face, the one he needed her to see when he walked through that door. He went inside. Adrienne was in the living room, not on the couch watching television, not reading, not doing any of the things a person does at 10 o'clock when they are at ease in their own home. She was sitting upright in the armchair near the front window, the one that faced the driveway, with her phone in her lap and her shoulders pulled back like a woman braced for impact. She had been watching him sit in the truck. She had been waiting. Her eyes were sharp, searching. There was something tight around her mouth, the particular set of someone who has rehearsed 4 different versions of a conversation and is waiting to see which one she needs. Brendan had called her. Jerome was certain of it. The swollen jaw, the split lip, the concrete floor. Brendan had delivered his warning, and Adrienne had spent the last several hours preparing for the explosion. Jerome hung his keys on the hook by the door. He set his work boots on the mat. He walked into the living room in his socks, looked at his wife, and smiled. "Hey, long day?" She blinked. Once. The searching look faltered. "Where were you?" she asked. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. "Mama's. She made cornbread. I stayed too long." He crossed to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and poured a glass of water. "You eat already?" "Jerome, I'm tired," he said. He drank the water slowly, set the glass in the sink, and kissed her on the cheek as he passed. His lips touched skin, and he felt nothing. "I'm going up. Early morning tomorrow." He climbed the stairs. Behind him, in the living room, Adrienne sat perfectly still with her rehearsed conversations dissolving into silence. She had been ready for rage. She had been ready for accusations, for thrown objects, for the kind of scene that would justify what she had done, that would transform her from the one who betrayed into the one who escaped. Jerome gave her nothing, and nothing was the one response she had not prepared for. 2 weeks passed like water over stone. Jerome came home every night. He asked about dinner. He watched television beside her on the couch, with a space between them that was unremarkable only because the space had existed for over a year, and both of them had pretended it was normal. He did not ask about her work. He did not mention Brendan Price. He did not change a single pattern of their domestic life. Adrienne watched him. He could feel it, her eyes tracking him when she thought he wasn't looking, cataloging his behavior for signs of a coming eruption. She was waiting for the other shoe, waiting for the confrontation that would begin the war she had already armored herself for. It never came, and day by day her posture loosened. Her rehearsed defenses softened. She began to believe, as people do when they want badly enough to believe, that Jerome was in denial, that the punch in the parking garage had been the extent of his reaction, that he was a man who could absorb a blow like that and simply continue forward, unaltered, manageable. She was wrong, but her being wrong was the point. While Adrienne measured Jerome's silence and mistook it for weakness, Victor and attorney Marcus Harris were disassembling the Watts financial life with surgical precision. Harris was 54, a family law specialist in Buckhead with 20 years of forensic accounting work behind him, and the particular energy of a man who genuinely enjoyed finding money that had been hidden. Victor had called him the knight of the parking structure. By the following Monday, Harris had subpoenaed 18 months of bank records, cross-referenced them with the joint tax filings, and begun the slow, meticulous work of following every dollar Jerome had ever earned into and out of accounts bearing his wife's name. It took 11 days. The report was 47 pages. Victor's office occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in Reynoldstown. Exposed brick, drafting tables, a conference room with a glass wall overlooking the shop floor where 2 apprentices were cutting trim. Jerome sat at the conference table on a Tuesday afternoon with the folder open in front of him. Page 1. A joint savings account at First National. Balance as of 18 months ago, $203,000. Current balance, $91,000. Withdrawals coded by Adrienne as household reserves, emergency maintenance, property tax escrow. None of those categories existed. There was no maintenance fund. The property taxes were paid from a separate escrow through their mortgage servicer. The codes were fiction, clean, bureaucratic, designed to look unremarkable in a joint statement that Adrienne correctly assumed Jerome reviewed only in quarterly summary. Page 14. A private account opened at a separate institution under Adrienne's maiden name, Hollis, an account Jerome had never seen, never been informed of, never consented to. Balance, $112,000. Deposits, 47 transfers over 18 months. Small enough individually to avoid the thresholds that trigger automatic review. $1,800 here, $3,200 there, $4,000 on a Tuesday in November. Each one sourced from the joint account. Each one taken from business distributions, money Jerome earned on job sites, managing crews, pouring foundations, building the thing that paid for everything in their shared life. She had not fallen into an affair and gotten careless with money. She had built an exit fund the way Jerome built houses, one careful measurement at a time, one load at a time, patient and deliberate, and designed to hold weight when the moment came to use it. The affair was distraction. The money was the plan. Jerome read every page, 47 pages. He did not skim. He did not skip ahead. He read each line the way he read a building inspection, noting every failure, every code violation, every structural compromise that had been hidden behind clean paint. When he finished, he closed the folder. He set it down flat on the conference table with both hands, fingers spread, pressing it against the wood as though confirming it was real and solid and not going anywhere. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. "Marcus," he said. His voice was even, unremarkable. The voice of a man confirming a delivery time or scheduling a concrete pour. "I need you to flag those transfers for the petition. Every single one. And I need a timeline graphic. Deposits against the dates of my business distributions. Show the match." He listened. He nodded once. "That's fine. Thursday works." He hung up. Victor sat across the table. He had not spoken during the entire reading. He did not speak now. His pen was still in his hand, motionless, and his eyes were on Jerome's face, reading it the way he might read a load-bearing wall that had gone too quiet under stress. Victor understood silence. He understood Jerome's particular silences better than anyone alive except Doris. And this one, this flatness, this measured calm, this absence of heat, was not a man in denial. It was not a man overwhelmed. It was not even a man in pain, though pain was certainly present somewhere beneath the surface. This was a man who had made a decision so complete that emotion was no longer required to sustain it. The decision was structural now, load-bearing. It would hold whether Jerome was angry or sad or numb or anything else, because it had been poured and cured and set into something that did not need feeling to stand. Victor said nothing. He capped his pen. He understood. Jerome pulled into the driveway at 10:40. The house was dark except for the porch light and the blue glow of the bedroom television leaking through the curtains upstairs. He sat in the truck for a moment, engine off, keys resting in his palm. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked somewhere 2 streets over. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint chemical sweetness of someone's dryer vent. He went inside. Adrienne was asleep. He could hear her breathing from the top of the stairs, slow and even, the particular rhythm of someone who had stopped waiting for a fight that wasn't coming. Good. He didn't need her awake for this. Jerome set his bag on the kitchen counter, pulled out the folder, and opened it under the light above the sink. Then he moved to the table. He spread the pages in order. Bank statements first, then the timeline Harris had drafted, then the account records from the institution in Adrienne's maiden name. He placed them in rows, left to right, the way he laid out blueprints before a pour. Each page a section, each section a fact. He worked through them slowly, not reading again. He had already read every word. This was organization. This was sequence. He was building the order in which these facts would be presented, and to whom and when. He penciled small numbers in the margins. He paper-clipped related documents together. He noted 3 dates where Adrienne's transfers aligned within 48 hours of his largest quarterly distributions. The pattern so clean, it could have been graphed. By midnight, the folder was reorganized, numbered, and closed. Jerome washed his hands at the kitchen sink, dried them on the towel hanging from the oven handle, and went upstairs. Adrienne had not moved. He undressed in the dark, lay down beside her, and stared at the ceiling until sleep came. The call came at 2:17 the next afternoon. Jerome was at the Reynoldstown site reviewing a framing inspection when his phone buzzed. The screen read, Paula Hollis. He had not spoken to Adrienne's younger sister in 4 months, not since a family birthday dinner where Paula had been quiet and distant in a way he noticed but did not ask about. He stepped away from the crew and answered, Jerome. Her voice was tight, not crying, but close to the edge of something. I need to talk to you. I should have called months ago. He leaned against the bed of his truck. I'm listening. I knew. The words came fast, like she'd been holding a breath for a year, and finally let it go. About Brendan. I've known for 12 months. Adrienne told me. She called me one night and told me everything like she was proud of it, like she expected me to be happy for her. Jerome said nothing. He watched his crew working through the open frame of the building, 2 men lifting a header into place, steady and coordinated. I begged her to stop, Paula continued. 3 times, 4. She said I didn't understand. She said the marriage was already over, and she was just managing the timing. A hard breath. She wouldn't listen. And I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't my business, that she was my sister and I owed her that. What else? Jerome asked. His voice was level, not cold, not warm, just present. Paula was quiet for a beat. Then, Brendan's not leaving his wife, Jerome. He never was. Adrian thinks the baby changes things, that he'll commit now. He won't. Another pause. There's a woman in Savannah, a former colleague of his from his last hospital. She has a 4-year-old daughter, Brendan's daughter. He's been paying her, informal, no court order, no paper trail, to keep it quiet. He's done this before. He has a whole system for it. Jerome closed his eyes. The sun pressed warm against his face. Adrienne, who had planned everything, who had moved $112,000, one careful transfer at a time, who had consulted divorce attorneys and restructured finances and built an exit strategy with spreadsheet precision. She was 8 weeks pregnant by a man who had already fathered a child he hid and paid for like a subscription he forgot to cancel. The woman who calculated everything had been outplayed by someone with more practice. "Thank you, Paula," Jerome said. He did not tell her it was okay. He did not absolve her of 12 months of silence. He did not comfort her. He asked one question. "The things you know, will you say them in front of other people if it becomes necessary?" Yes. No hesitation. The word came clean and immediate, like something she had already decided before she picked up the phone. All right. He hung up. He stood still for a moment against the truck, phone in his hand, watching the crew set another beam into place. Then he dialed Victor. Victor answered on the second ring. "Talk to me." Jerome relayed everything, the 12 months of knowledge, the pregnancy and Brendan's lack of intention, the woman in Savannah, the 4-year-old child, the quiet payments with no legal structure behind them. When he finished, Victor was silent for 3 seconds. Then, "The woman in Savannah changes things." "I know," Jerome said. "Find her." Victor found her in 2 days. He worked his network the way he worked everything, methodical, quiet, and without wasted motion. A former colleague in Savannah's family law community. A record search tied to Brendan Price's previous hospital affiliation. A name surfacing in payroll adjacency that matched the timeline Paula had described. The woman's name was not shared with Jerome. Victor explained this simply. "She's not a weapon. She's a witness. We treat her accordingly." What Victor drafted was a letter, 3 paragraphs, printed on his firm's letterhead, sent certified mail to an address in a quiet neighborhood on Savannah's south side. The language was careful. It did not threaten. It did not promise. It informed. The letter stated that a legal proceeding in Atlanta had named Brendan Price. That testimony regarding a prior undisclosed paternity matter could be materially relevant to a hospital board's determination of his professional conduct. That the informal payment arrangement she had been living under for 4 years carried no legal weight, no court order, no binding agreement, no enforcement mechanism. That she had options no one had explained to her. That a family law attorney could be retained on her behalf at no cost if she wished to explore those options. Victor mailed the letter on a Tuesday morning. She called his office Thursday afternoon. 46 hours. Her voice was steady but cautious, the tone of a woman who had lived inside someone else's terms for 4 years, and was hearing, for the first time, that those terms were made of paper. Victor listened. He answered her questions. He made no demands. He gave her the name of a family attorney in Savannah who specialized in paternity establishment and told her the decision was hers entirely. She said she would call the attorney. She did. The same week, the legal architecture Jerome had designed began to move. Attorney Harris filed the divorce petition on a Wednesday morning at the Fulton County Courthouse. The petition cited dissipation of marital assets, $112,000 in documented transfers from joint accounts to a private account in Adrienne's maiden name over 18 months, without Jerome's knowledge or consent. It requested a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, all income distributions, and any redirected funds that may have been placed in accounts or instruments not previously disclosed. The filing was clean and factual. No emotional language, no accusations beyond what the numbers proved. Harris had crafted it to read exactly the way Jerome spoke, measured, specific, and impossible to dismiss. Simultaneously, a subpoena issued to the hospital's finance office requested records related to any institutional accounts, benefits, or financial instruments that Adrienne Watts may have directed or accessed in her capacity as administrator. The subpoena was narrow enough to survive a motion to quash, and broad enough to create a paper trail the hospital's legal counsel could not ignore. That subpoena arrived at the hospital at 8:47 a.m. on Thursday. At 8:52 a.m., Adrienne Watts walked off the elevator on the 4th floor and found two representatives from Human Resources standing outside her office door. Jerome's withdrawal letter reached the hospital board the same morning. It was addressed to the chair of the facilities committee and copied to the chief compliance officer. It stated that Watts and Okafor Construction was formally withdrawing its bid for the Phase 3 administrative wing expansion due to a conflict of interest that had come to his attention. The conflict was described in precise documentary language. A senior hospital administrator, Adrienne Watts, Director of Administrative Services, had maintained an undisclosed personal and sexual relationship with Brendan Price, Vice President of Hospital Operations, for approximately 2 years. The relationship had produced a pregnancy. Neither party had disclosed the relationship to the board, to compliance, or to any oversight body, despite Mr. Price's direct supervisory influence over Mrs. Watts's department. Jerome attached a timeline. He attached the subpoena. He attached nothing that was not already documented or legally sourced. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. Adrienne called at 4:23 that afternoon. Jerome was in his truck, driving south on Moreland Avenue, windows down, listening to nothing. Her name appeared on the screen. He let it ring twice. Then he answered. "Hey." His voice was easy, pleasant. The voice of a man asking about dinner plans. "What did you do?" Her words came fast and fractured. Fury, and something underneath it that sounded like the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Jerome, what the hell did you do?" "HR pulled me out of my office. They took my access badge. They're talking about administrative leave, and I have a subpoena sitting on my desk. And what is this?" "Adrienne." He said her name calmly, like he was settling a child who had woken from a bad dream. "Your attorney should call mine. Harris. You have his number from the filing." "Filing? What filing?" "There are financial documents you're going to want to review before our next conversation." He paused. Let the silence hold for exactly 1 beat. "I hope you're taking care of yourself." He hung up. The light ahead turned green. Jerome drove through it without slowing down. The hospital board convened on Monday morning at 7 UD a.m. An hour before regular administrative staff arrived, an hour before Brendan Price would have any reason to check his calendar for unscheduled meetings. The emergency ethics review had been triggered Friday afternoon, less than 24 hours after Jerome's withdrawal letter reached the facility's committee chair. The chair had read it once, read it again, and walked it directly to the chief compliance officer's desk without stopping at his own. By Friday at 5 o'clock, the board's legal counsel had reviewed Jerome's documentation, confirmed the subpoena was active, and recommended immediate convocation under Section 9.4 of the hospital's Executive Conduct Policy, the section that dealt with undisclosed conflicts of interest involving senior leadership. The 7 members of the Ethics Committee sat in the 4th-floor conference room with the blinds drawn, coffee untouched, folders open. At 8:15 a.m., Brendan Price stepped off the elevator and found two people waiting outside his office. One was the Director of Human Resources. The other was the board's outside legal counsel, a woman Brendan had met exactly once, at his hiring, and whose presence in the building on a Monday morning meant something had gone very wrong. They asked him to come with them. He straightened his tie. He smiled. He walked with them to the conference room like a man who believed this was a misunderstanding that his charm could resolve in 15 minutes. It was not. The board presented everything simultaneously. They did not ease him in. They did not offer context or preamble. The committee chair opened a folder, placed 3 documents on the table, and stated the allegations in the flat, measured language of institutional process. First, a documented undisclosed personal and sexual relationship with Adrienne Watts, Director of Administrative Services, lasting approximately 2 years. Mr. Price held direct supervisory influence over Mrs. Watts's department. The relationship was never reported to the board, to HR, or to any compliance body as required under the hospital's executive conduct policy. Second, a subpoena issued in connection with the divorce proceeding in Fulton County had named Mr. Price and requested hospital financial records related to marital fraud allegations against Mrs. Watts. The hospital was now a party to a legal proceeding it had not been informed of, directly because of Mr. Price's undisclosed conduct. Third, a corroborating witness in Savannah, Georgia, had provided documentation of a prior undisclosed paternity matter involving Mr. Price and a former hospital colleague, establishing a pattern of conduct that predated the current relationship by approximately 4 years. The folder also contained a pregnancy disclosure. 8 weeks. A subordinate employee. In a department he oversaw. Brendan's smile had disappeared by the second document. By the third, the color had left his face entirely. His attorney, retained by phone at 6:45 that morning, after a frantic call from Brendan, who had received a voicemail from HR overnight, spoke aggressively. He challenged the sourcing of the Savannah witness. He argued the relationship was consensual and between adults. He called the withdrawal letter retaliatory. He questioned whether Jerome Watts had standing to file a complaint at all. The board listened politely. They had already decided. Under Section 9.4-C of the hospital's executive conduct policy, an undisclosed intimate relationship between a senior officer and a direct or indirect subordinate constituted a terminable offense regardless of consent. The policy had been revised 3 years earlier after a prior incident at a sister facility. Brendan had signed the acknowledgement page himself. His signature was in the file. The termination was for cause, not a resignation, not a quiet reassignment to a regional office, not a mutual separation with a handshake and a reference letter. Cause. And under the terms of Brendan Price's employment contract, the contract he had negotiated so proudly 9 years ago, the contract that had made him feel untouchable, termination for cause triggered an automatic forfeiture clause. $340,000 in unvested deferred compensation. 18 months from vesting. Gone. The money did not transfer. It did not suspend. It reverted to the hospital's general fund as if it had never been his, because, as of 9:47 a.m. on a Monday morning, it never was. Brendan's attorney asked for a recess. The board declined. The decision was final, effective immediately. Security would escort Mr. Price to his office to collect personal items. His badge, his parking access, and his institutional email would be deactivated by noon. Brendan sat in the chair for a long time after the room emptied. His hands were flat on the table. His jaw, the one Jerome had reset 3 weeks earlier on a parking garage floor, was tight. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say in that room that would change what had just happened to him. Caroline Price learned of her husband's termination at 1:15 that afternoon. The hospital's administrative community was small. People talked in hallways, in break rooms, in group texts that moved faster than official communications. A colleague she trusted called her directly, not to gossip, but because she had known Caroline for 7 years and could not, in conscience, let her learn this from a news article or a rumor. The colleague told her what the board's decision was. She told her about the relationship. She told her about the pregnancy. She hesitated, then told her about Savannah. Caroline was quiet for a long time. Then she thanked her friend. She hung up. She sat in her kitchen, the kitchen of the house they had shared for 9 years, the house where she had raised 2 children while believing she was married to a difficult but faithful man. And she made one phone call. Her attorney answered on the second ring. By Wednesday, Caroline Price had filed for divorce. Her petition requested the marital home, primary custody of their 2 children pending psychological evaluation, and a full accounting of all financial assets, including any undisclosed payments to third parties. Her attorney, a woman who specialized in high-asset divorces involving financial misconduct, had been handed a complete timeline of Brendan's behavior by a mutual acquaintance in the legal community who had seen the board documents circulate. The attorney was thorough. She was not kind. In Savannah, the woman with the 4-year-old daughter retained the family law attorney Victor had referred. The filing was straightforward: a petition to establish formal paternity and a request for court-ordered child support based on Brendan Price's documented income and assets. The informal payments, cash transfers to a personal account, structured specifically to avoid paper trails, made under the implied threat that visibility would damage her career, became exhibits. Every deposit, every month. 4 years of a man buying silence from a woman who had never been told she did not have to sell it. The court would establish a legal obligation, not negotiable, not informal, not quiet, a permanent order that Brendan could not restructure, could not renegotiate, and could not escape through charm or intimidation or the particular confidence of a man who had always believed his problems were things that happened to other people. By Friday, 5 business days after the board convened, Brendan Price's life had been reduced to its components: no position, no title, no office, no institutional email, no parking access, no professional network willing to return his calls. $340,000 in deferred compensation, forfeited. An active divorce proceeding in which his wife's attorney had already obtained a temporary restraining order preventing the sale or transfer of marital assets. A second child support filing in a different state establishing a legal obligation he had spent 4 years hiding. A professional reputation in Atlanta's hospital administration community that had evaporated so completely that his name had already become a cautionary reference in hallway conversations, the thing people mentioned when discussing what the conduct policy actually meant. He had not been beaten, not in the way he might have understood. He had been disassembled. Every pillar, every wall, every load-bearing structure he had built his life on: title, compensation, marriage, reputation, the assumption that consequences were things that happened to smaller men, removed one by one, in sequence, by a man he had laughed at in a parking garage 3 weeks ago, a man he had looked at and seen a contractor, a worker, someone who could be told and dismissed and forgotten. Jerome did not celebrate. He was at Victor's office Friday evening, sitting across the desk with a legal pad and a pen, reviewing the mediation preparation documents Harris had sent over. The divorce mediation was scheduled for 11 days out. The forensic accounting was complete. The settlement terms were drafted. The strategy was clean. Victor leaned back in his chair and studied Jerome for a moment. "You good?" Jerome looked up from the documents. His face was calm, settled. The face of a man who had moved past the part of the process that required anger and arrived at the part that required only precision. "I'm good," he said. He turned the page. Walk me through the asset schedule again. Victor nodded. He opened the file. They worked until 9 o'clock, preparing for the room where Jerome would sit across from the woman who had tried to dismantle him and show her, with documentation and patience, exactly what she had miscalculated. Jerome arrived at the mediation building at 9:25 a.m., 5 minutes early. He wore a plain navy suit, no tie, clean boots, dress boots, not work boots, but the distinction was subtle enough that only someone looking would notice. He carried a single leather folder under his left arm. Nothing else. No briefcase, no rolling file box, just the folder and the calm, settled expression of a man who had already done the hard work somewhere else and was here only to deliver the result. Victor walked beside him. Harris, the attorney, a quiet woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a reputation for never raising her voice in a room she intended to win, walked 2 steps behind, pulling a single rolling case of documents. The mediation office was on the 4th floor of a glass building in Midtown. Neutral territory, beige carpet, a long walnut table with 6 chairs, and a mediator already seated at the head, reviewing her notes. A pitcher of water, 2 pads of legal paper. The kind of room where marriages ended in numbers rather than words. Jerome sat. He set his folder on the table. He did not open it. Victor sat to his left. Harris to his right. They waited. Adrienne arrived at 9:32. She wore a charcoal dress. Professional. Composed. Her attorney, a man named Friedman, mid-40s, aggressive reputation in family law, carried 2 file boxes and a tablet. He was already talking as they entered, leaning toward Adrienne with instructions, positioning her before she even sat down. Adrienne took her seat across from Jerome. She did not look at him immediately. When she did, her eyes moved across his face quickly, assessing, looking for cracks, looking for the grieving husband, the angry one, the one who would make a scene and give Friedman something to work with. She found a wall. Jerome met her gaze and nodded once. Polite. The same nod he would give a stranger at a gas station. Then he looked down at his folder and waited for the mediator to begin. Harris opened. Her voice was even and unhurried. She spoke the way someone reads a blueprint, detail by detail, measurement by measurement, every number placed exactly where it needed to be. Over a period of 18 months, Mrs. Watts transferred $112,000 from jointly held accounts into a personal account in her name alone. The transfers were categorized in household bookkeeping records as household reserves. They were not household reserves. She opened the rolling case and distributed a bound packet to the mediator and to Friedman. 46 pages. Bank records. Transfer dates. Account numbers. Highlighted lines showing the origin of every dollar. Jerome's quarterly business distributions flowing through their joint tax filing, redirected without his knowledge or consent. During this same 18-month period, Harris continued, Mrs. Watts was in active consultation with a family law attorney regarding divorce proceedings. She continued to participate in joint financial decisions, joint tax filings, and joint account management, while simultaneously planning an exit designed to reduce her husband's accessible assets prior to filing. Friedman leaned forward. Those transfers were household management decisions made within the scope of... Harris did not raise her voice. She simply turned to the next tab in the packet, page 14. The account in question was opened 11 days after Mrs. Watts's first documented consultation with her prior counsel, page 22. The transfer amounts correlate directly to Mr. Watts's quarterly distributions and were initiated within 48 hours of each deposit. Page 31. Mrs. Watts's own banking records show the account was never used for a household expense. Not once in 18 months. 0 outgoing transactions. She looked at Friedman over her reading glasses. It was a holding account. It held, and it waited. The room was quiet. Jerome still had not spoken. He did not need to. Harris was the instrument. The documentation was the argument. He was simply present. The man it had been done to, sitting upright and still, letting the numbers tell the story his voice did not need to. Harris presented Jerome's terms. Mr. Watts requests full, uncontested ownership of Watts and Okafor Construction, including all contracts, equipment, and accounts receivable. Return of the $112,000 in transferred funds as part of the equitable distribution. And the marital residence. Friedman's pen stopped. The residence is not negotiable, Harris said. Mr. Watts is not requesting alimony. He is not requesting extended litigation. He is not requesting punitive damages, though the record would support them under Georgia's marital waste doctrine. He is requesting equity. Clean, final, settled today. Friedman looked at Adrian. His expression said, "This is worse than I told you." "We need a recess," Friedman said. The mediator nodded. 15 minutes. Chairs moved. Friedman gathered his tablet, already speaking low and fast to Adrian about page 14, page 22, the account she had never mentioned to him in exactly those terms. But before Adrian stood, she looked across the table at Jerome. He was still seated, still calm. His hands rested flat on the folder he had never needed to open because everything inside it was already in the room. Her expression shifted. It was not anger. Not the cold, planning anger she had worn for 2 years. It was not contempt. Not the quiet dismissal she had practiced in 100 small moments when she thought he wasn't paying attention. It was something else. Something closer to recognition. The particular shock of a person who realizes, too late, that the man sitting across from her is not the man she thought she married, and not the man she thought she was leaving. He is someone she never accounted for, someone her spreadsheets never measured. She was seeing him, perhaps for the first time. Jerome held her gaze. He did not speak. He did not nod. He did not look away. He simply waited. The recess lasted 40 minutes, not 15. When Friedman and Adrian returned, the charcoal dress looked the same, but her posture did not. She sat straighter, held herself tighter. The way a person holds themselves when the ground they thought was solid has shifted beneath them, and the only option left is to pretend it hasn't. Friedman made minor adjustments. Adrian would retain her personal vehicle outright. Her 401k contributions predating the marriage would remain untouched. A 60-day window to vacate the marital residence rather than 30. Harris looked at Jerome. Jerome nodded once. Those were reasonable. Those were the concessions of a man who wanted clean, not cruel. The mediator produced the agreement. 4 copies. Blue ink. Adrian signed first. Her hand was steady, but her jaw was tight. The small muscle beneath her ear flexing the way it did when she was holding something behind her teeth. Jerome signed second. His signature was the same one he put on contracts and permits and invoices, unhurried, legible, final. He set the pen down and closed his folder. "Thank you," the mediator said. "This concludes today's session." In the hallway, Jerome shook Harris's hand. "Clean work," he said. Harris smiled, small, professional, satisfied in the way of someone who had done precisely what she was retained to do. "Call me if anything arises during the 60 days. It shouldn't, but call me." She pulled her rolling case toward the elevator. Victor stepped away to take a call. His phone had been vibrating against his thigh for the last 10 minutes, a site foreman with a question that wouldn't wait. He moved toward the window at the end of the hall, voice low, one hand gesturing at nothing the way he always did when giving instructions. Jerome was alone for less than 30 seconds before Adrian appeared beside him. She had sent Friedman ahead. Her purse hung from one shoulder. Her hands were clasped in front of her. A pose Jerome recognized from a decade of watching her compose herself before difficult conversations, staff meetings, phone calls with her mother, the practiced stillness of a woman preparing to deliver a narrative. Jerome. He turned. He did not step back. He did not step forward. "I loved you," she said. "I need you to know that. Whatever you think about everything else, I loved you." He said nothing. She continued. Her voice carried the careful cadence of something rehearsed, until it felt like truth. Smooth, measured. Each word placed with the precision of someone who had tested these sentences against a mirror. "The marriage stopped working years ago. You were building. You were always building. Every morning, every weekend, every conversation that turned into a phone call with Victor, or a bid review, or a crew problem. I was here. I was in the house you bought, wearing the life you funded, and I was invisible in it." She paused, drew a breath. "Brendan saw me, that's all. He made me feel seen in a way you hadn't in years. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth." Jerome listened. His face gave her nothing. He stood with his hands at his sides, his folder under one arm, his weight settled evenly on both feet, the way a man stands when he is not going anywhere and not being moved. She finished. She waited. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere below them, a door opened and closed. Victor's voice murmured distantly at the window. Jerome was still for a long moment, not because he was searching for words, because he was deciding how many of them she deserved. Then he spoke, low, even, without heat. "Nothing you just said explains the money." Adrienne blinked. "I can hear a woman who fell out of love," Jerome said. "I know what that sounds like. I've been listening to it for 2 years, but that's not what this was. You didn't drift. You planned. You sat down with an attorney while I was still coming home to you every night. You opened an account 11 days later. You moved my money I earned on job sites at 5 in the morning, money I reinvested instead of spending because I thought we were building something together, and you moved it into a box with your name on it for 18 months, while we filed taxes together, while we ate dinner together, while you looked me in my face." He paused, not for effect, because the next part mattered, and he wanted her to hear every word. "Your plan required me to be less. That's what I need you to understand. Not just that you were leaving. I could have survived that, but you needed me diminished for it to work. You looked at everything I built, every contract, every crew, every dollar I put back in instead of pulling out. And you decided it was a resource to be redirected. Not a life, not ours, mine. And you took from it like it was owed to you." Adrienne's lips parted. Nothing came out. Jerome said, "You didn't stop loving me. You started seeing me as an asset to be liquidated. Those are not the same thing. And I need you to understand that I know the difference." He held her gaze for one more second. Not long enough to be cruel, just long enough to be certain. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator. His boots were quiet on the beige carpet. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. He did not look back. The drive to Doris's house took 22 minutes. Jerome drove with the windows cracked and the radio off. The air was warm and carried the faint green smell of cut grass from the neighborhoods he passed through. Familiar blocks, familiar turns, streets he had driven 1,000 times on the way to the one house in the world that had never required anything of him except that he show up. He parked at the curb. The engine ticked in the quiet. On the porch, a small figure sat on the top step, with a yellow dump truck clutched in both hands. Marcus, 5 years old. Jerome's nephew, his cousin Sheila's boy, with the round, serious face of a child who had been waiting for someone specific and was now satisfied that the right truck had pulled up. "Uncle Jerome!" Marcus stood up, holding the dump truck out like evidence. "I've been waiting." "I see that." Jerome climbed the steps and lowered himself onto the porch beside the boy. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. Through the screen door he could smell something, greens, maybe, or cornbread, and hear Doris moving in the kitchen with the particular unhurried rhythm of a woman who had already set a plate aside. Marcus pushed the dump truck across the porch boards, making engine sounds with his mouth. Then he looked up at Jerome with the blunt curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are complicated. "How you build a house?" Jerome looked at him, really looked at him. The small hands, the serious eyes, the absolute faith that Uncle Jerome would know the answer, because Uncle Jerome always knew the answer. "You start with the foundation," Jerome said. "Before the walls, before the roof, before anything you can see. You dig down first. How far? Depends on the ground. Depends on what you're building. But you go down far enough that it holds." Marcus frowned. "Then what?" "Then you pour it. Concrete. Slow. You don't rush it." Jerome picked up a piece of chalk that was sitting on the step. Doris kept a bucket of them for Marcus and drew a flat rectangle on the porch boards. "You pour it, and then you wait. You let it cure. Let it get hard. Let it get strong." "How long?" "Long as it takes. If you build on top before it's ready, the whole thing cracks. Everything above it shifts. Doesn't matter how good the walls are or how pretty the roof is. If the foundation isn't set, nothing holds." Marcus studied the chalk rectangle with the seriousness of a surgeon. Then he looked up. "Can I see yours?" Jerome smiled. Not the performance of a smile. Not relief. Just warmth. The particular warmth of a man who had come from a room full of numbers and signatures and endings and found, on a porch in the late afternoon sun, something that was only beginning. "Not yet," he said. "I'm still letting it cure." Marcus didn't fully understand. His brow furrowed. He pushed the dump truck over the chalk rectangle. Jerome picked up the chalk again. He drew it slower this time. The foundation, then the walls on top, then the pointed shape of a roof. Simple lines, clear shapes. "See? Foundation first. Always." Marcus nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Again," the boy said. Jerome drew it again. He had time now. He had nothing but time and ground, and the particular peace of a man who had settled his accounts, and found, in the settling, that there was still something steady left beneath him. He drew it again. The boy watched. The afternoon stretched. Doris's screen door opened and the smell of cornbread drifted across the porch like a hand on his shoulder. He kept drawing. The scissors were oversized and ridiculous, the kind they make for ribbon cuttings, with gold-painted handles and blades that could barely cut paper. Jerome held them steady anyway. He stood at the front of the small crowd gathered on Carver Street, the morning sun catching the fresh white trim of the building behind him, and waited for the councilwoman to finish her remarks. The development stretched across half a block. 16 units of affordable housing, clean lines, solid brick, deep porches built wide enough for chairs and conversation. A $4.2 million municipal contract, the largest in the history of Watts and Okafor construction. The kind of project Jerome had wanted to pursue for years, the kind Adrienne had quietly discouraged because the margins weren't prestigious enough for her taste. The margins were fine. The work was better than fine. It was the best thing he had ever built. Neighborhood residents lined the sidewalk, older women in church hats, young families with strollers, a group of teenagers from the rec center who had watched the construction all summer like it was a show. A photographer from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution crouched near the ribbon, angling for the shot. City council members flanked Jerome on both sides, smiling the particular smiles of people who wanted to be near good news. Jerome cut the ribbon. The crowd clapped. He shook hands, council members, residents, the general foreman who had run the site with a precision Jerome respected. Victor stood near the back, phone to his ear, managing something at one of their 3 other active sites, and raised a fist briefly in Jerome's direction without breaking his conversation. 3 active sites. A full crew roster. A reputation that had grown not through spectacle, but through the quiet accumulation of promises kept. Jerome had not changed his approach. He had simply been given room to work without someone beside him calculating the value of what he was building and how to redirect it. After the ceremony, Jerome walked the building one more time, ran his hand along the porch railing of Unit 7, checked the caulk lines around a window frame. The units were already leased. Everyone. Families would move in next month. He thought about the apprenticeship program. 6 young men. First year. All black. All from neighborhoods like this one. Places where the work existed, but the pathway to ownership did not. Jerome had endowed the program himself, structured it the way Doris would have structured a curriculum. Clear expectations, patient repetition, the steady insistence that competence builds on itself if you give it time and attention. The program's first graduation had been 3 weeks ago. Small ceremony, Doris's backyard, folding chairs and a table of food that Doris had spent 2 days preparing because that was how she showed pride. Not with words, but with cornbread and collard greens and sweet tea in the good pitcher. Paula had come. Doris's quiet suggestion, Jerome knew, though neither of them said so. She sat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, and watched the 6 graduates receive their certificates. When Jerome looked up from the small podium and found her face in the back, their eyes held for a moment. She nodded. He nodded back. That was enough. For now. Some structures take longer to assess. Jerome knew the difference between a bridge worth repairing and one that was never sound. He was still measuring. He did not rush assessments. Adrienne. He did not think about her often. When he did, it arrived without heat. A fact, not a wound. She had been reassigned following her administrative leave to a regional facility 2 hours outside Atlanta. The title was lateral on paper. Everyone in the building knew what it was. She went quietly. Brendan Price did not go quietly, but he went. His termination for cause followed him through every reference check, like a brand. The professional community in hospital administration was smaller than people realized. Institutional memory was long. He consulted now. Fractional work for organizations that did not require references from his previous employer. His divorce finalized quickly and unfavorably. Caroline retained the house. The Savannah Child Support Order stood as a permanent legal obligation. The $340,000 in forfeited deferred compensation did not come back. It would never come back. The laugh in the parking garage had cost him, when tallied across every dimension, somewhere in the range of everything. Dusk. Jerome stood alone on his land. He had sold the marital home 4 months after the settlement and used the proceeds to buy this half-acre in a part of Atlanta he had loved since he was a teenager, riding his bike through these streets with nowhere to be. The lot was quiet, edged with old oaks, set back from the road just far enough that the evening felt private. The frame was going up. Just studs and open sky and the smell of new lumber in the cooling air. No deadline. No client. No one waiting on a walkthrough or a punch list. Every measurement was his. Every choice was his. He picked up his level, the same one he'd carried for 12 years, the yellow paint worn smooth along the edges, and set it against a beam. The bubble floated, settled, and held. Plumb. Straight. True. Jerome smiled. Not relief, not triumph. Just a man alone on his own land at the end of a good day, looking at something he built, knowing it would hold. He picked up the next board. He got back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.